we are good. All right, so before we jump into today's session, if you have any question from what has been discussed previously, please let me know. If there are no questions, then I think that we'll just go ahead to the business of the day. So yesterday we started something, and so we'll just continue with what we started. So I'm just powering on my virtual machine. If you have yours and you are following, you can also turn on your virtual machine. Desmond, are you asking a question? Hello?
I'm fine.
All right. Okay, so yesterday we explained the concept of Active Directory, and then we looked at what domains are, what OUs are, and then the things that comes with it. So we will just go straight forward to business and then do our first installation. So our goal is to make our server a domain controller. So we are going to select Active Directory domain set. And once you take the role, please, someone's speaker is on, I can hear myself. So once you take the role, it automatically brings the features that are required for you to run. It brings the features that are required for it to run. So you just click add features. And then you click next. So it gives you a summary of what Active Directory is all about. So Active Directory stores information about users, computers, and other devices on the network. It helps administrators securely manage this information and facilitate resource sharing and collaboration between users. So there are things that we need to note. So the first one says that to help users to be able to log on in case of a server outage, install a minimum of 2 domain controllers. So the system is requiring us to install at least 2 domain controllers. This will ensure that if for any reason, your server is not available, users can still authenticate to the domain. So you are required to have at least 2 domain controllers. Then the second thing says that the setup also requires DNS. Who can tell me why this requires DNS? VJ. VJ. Please, can someone hear him? Because I can't hear him.
We can hear you.
No, I'm asking if you can hear VJ.
Oh no, Vijay, we can't hear Vijay.
Okay, who can tell us why Active Directory needs DNS? Anyone? There's no wrong answer here. Whatever you say is correct. Peter. Olympio. All right. So it's very simple.
Okay, look, let me try.
Okay.
So, with Active Directory, right? Since it's going to be like a collection of, let's say, computers and users, not just users, computers also, you need the domain name services in let's say, managing the naming of computers and let's say in a way, file service or whichever node is on the Active Directory, you need a domain name services to more like create like let's say a unique name also and more of it. Let me use the database for it. Yeah. I don't know if I'm right.
I don't buy it. It's not that you are not right, but I don't buy it.
Okay.
Okay. Hello.
Yeah.
So with the DNS service, I know some more times they translate requests of names into IP addresses.
Okay, so why do we need it in setting up Active Directory?
So that they can match the website host names. Example is .com or something. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, you are trying to make me assume I know what you are saying so that I'll say, okay, you are right. But me, in fact, no, but you are right. So basically, we need DNS because we are going to create a domain. And the only thing that I understand domain names is DNS. Are we okay?
So yeah, we are.
Yeah. So that is why we need the DNS. If not, there will be nothing to translate the names, as Japan said. All right. So we'll click next.
Yes.
So it gives us a summary of the things that we have selected. But this does not make the server a domain controller. This is just installing the files that are required to make the server a domain controller. So we'll click install and then give it some time to install. So basically, if you go to your workplace and the administrators are making noise and all that, this is how they set up the Active Directory. If you have a question, you can ask. So when the installation is done, we will be prompted to promote the server to a domain controller. And when it comes to promoting the server to a domain controller, the first thing you create is you create the forest. And the first domain you create in the forest becomes your root forest domain name. So you first create a forest, then within the forest, you have your first domain. If you decide to have other domains in it, those ones become trees in the forest. Are we clear? A moment, let me fetch my laptop charger. Okay. So my installation is ongoing, and you are not obliged to stick to this screen. You can actually close it if you want. It won't really change anything, because when it comes to the notification gives you the progress of what is happening. So you can close this, and when it is done, it will prompt you that it's done. I'm sure by now some of yours is done. That's if anyone is following with the configuration. Okay, so the installation is fine. Let's give it some time, and then we'll continue. So whilst it's running, I think we can discuss some few things whilst it's running. So when the installation is done, we will get the option. We'll have a screen like this. Are we okay? And in creating a forest or in creating your domain controller, there are three options. The first option is to add a domain controller to an existing domain, which will not be the ideal option for us because we don't have an existing domain. The second option is to add a new domain to an existing forest. We don't have a forest, so we can't add a new domain. And then we have add a new forest. So mostly the first option you will select will be to add a new forest. And then you provide the root forest domain name. You put a domain name here, and then you'll be required to provide credentials. Mostly you will use the administrator credentials to authorize the settings that you are doing. So once that is done, so these are just steps. So when I give you the slides, it just contains the steps that you can follow. The only thing that changes is this is the default domain name that Microsoft uses in some of their installations. Mostly in the Microsoft environment, you either see Contoso or you see, okay, I think it's done. I think it's done because once this thing is showing here, it means that the installation is done. So you can see that installation is complete and it says that configuration required. Installation succeeded on DC1. So you can see it says, well, promote this server to a domain controller. So you can either click on this or you can still close And you notice that there's a triangle in the notification. So you can also decide to use this and then click promote this server to a domain controller. And this is similar to what we saw in the slide. This is similar to what we saw in the slide. So it says what? Add a domain controller to an existing domain. So in the second configuration that we will do on the second server, we'll be adding a domain controller to an existing domain. But we can also decide to add a new domain to an existing forest if we want to have two different domain trees. Then we have add a new forest. Now when you select this option, you notice that the options available change. So we have the option to either add a child domain, just as I explained yesterday. If we are adding a child domain, then let's say, for example, if I put a parent domain of, let's say, louis.com, and I put the new domain name, then it may be, let's say, accra.louis.com, something like that. Or if we come here and instead of child domain name, we select tree domain, you notice that instead of parent name, it changed to what? Forest name. So you can add a new tree to an existing what? Forest, or you can add a child domain to an existing what? Domain, depending on what you are trying to do at that point in time. Please, is this part clear? But all the same, none of this is applicable here in that you don't have an hello?
We can hear you. We can hear you.
All right. This is because we don't have an existing domain or an existing forest to add a new domain to it. So we'll have to create a new forest. So when you select a new forest, it says that what? Specify the root domain name. Root domain name. So your root domain name becomes your root forest. It also becomes your domain. So we said our domain will be Marvel. Hey, I didn't hear that. Maverick, right?
Maverick, yeah.
Maverick.
Yes, exactly.
All right, .local. I'm not using .com because my system has internet connection. So if we put .com, we'll have an issue here. If it was maybe some local name that is not routable on the internet, fine. But
Mommy.
once Maverick.local is okay. .local means that the system should not worry about trying to find it on the internet. Are we okay? .local means the systems will not worry about finding it on the internet. So we are good. So we click next. So the next thing is asking us, we have the forest functional level and we have the domain functional level. The forest functional level and then the domain functional level. Remember, we have a forest, and the forest we have multiple domains. So the question is, when it comes to compatibility, how do you want this server to behave? If you say the forest functional level should be server 2016, then it means that within the forest, it cannot communicate or it won't be compatible with any server that is below server 2016. Is it clear?
Again, please.
Then the domain functional level also means that if you set the domain functional level to server 2016, hello?
Hello, sir. We can hear you, please.
All right. So I can decide to change it to, okay, I think the most closest is Server 2016. And I think Microsoft is trying to play it safe because whoever is having Server 2022 will definitely have older versions of the server there. And you are going to integrate the 2022 alongside the others. And so you can't decide that the functional level should be 2022. If there are other servers that are lower than this, then you have a problem. Then the next thing is the DNS. Remember that the system told us that it needs DNS. So in making the server a domain controller, it's also going to make it a DNS server. It's optional. We can decide to uncheck it. If we had a situation where we have a dedicated system functioning as a DNS, then we can uncheck this and point it to that particular DNS server. Then the next two options are grayed out. You can't touch it. The first one is what we call the global catalog. By default, your first domain controller becomes a global catalog server. The global catalog is a parent directory that all the other domain controllers will send a copy of their data to. So it becomes your main source. So let's say, for example, we have different branches of our organization. We have people in Accra, people in Kumasi, branches in Tamale, and all that. And we set this up as a global catalog server. Then all the other branches will send a copy of their database to the global catalog server. So if somebody in Kumasi needs to reference an object in Tamale, that person does not need to communicate with the system in Tamale. They can just communicate with the global catalog server and then receive that information because a copy of the Tamale database is going to be stored on the global catalog server. So by default, the first domain controller you set up becomes a global catalog server. And then because it is a global catalog server, it's also a writable server. So it cannot be a read-only server. So your first server cannot be a read-only server. Then we are supposed to provide what we call directory services restore mode password. Now, basically, this is the password you will use when you need to probably do a restore of your Active Directory from a backup. Or if you want to remove your Active Directory, this is the password you use. Because at the point when you are trying to uninstall your Active Directory, the Active Directory password itself will not be working. And most of the time, administrators forget this password because it may be a long time before you will reset, and it's not advisable to use the same password that you use as your admin password as your directory services restore mode password. But since this is a lab environment and we probably won't be discussing Windows Server backup, I will just put the same password I have there. Now it says that the delegation for this server cannot be created because the authoritative parent zone cannot be found. Now, when we talk about DNS, DNS operates in what we call zones. We have a primary zone, we have a secondary zone, we have a stub zone. Now, the system is trying to find out whether there already exists a zone for the domain that we have created. If you expand this, it gives you details that a delegation for this DNS server cannot be created because the authoritative parent zone cannot be found or it does not run Windows Server. If you are integrating with an existing DNS infrastructure, you should manually create a delegation to this DNS server. Otherwise, no action is required. So we are not really required to do any action because we are not integrating this into another environment. We are now setting everything up fresh. So we don't need to really do anything when it comes to this aspect. So just click OK and click Next. So the system is going to generate a NetBIOS name for us, which would be a single name for our domain. So in this case, it will be Maverick. Whenever you're logging in, you can reference our domain as Maverick, or you can put the entire domain name there. Then we'll click Next. Now, it's showing us where the files are going to be stored. These are the files for Active Directory. The database itself is going to be in your Drive C, Windows NTDS. The same thing applies to the log files of your database. Then there's the sysvol folder. Now the sysvol folder is basically a shared folder that is created automatically when you set up Active Directory by the system that allows domain controllers to share information amongst themselves. So it's also showing where this folder is going to be stored. But word of advice, in a live environment, you don't store your Active Directory database on your drive C. Because if anything happens to your drive C, it means that your Active Directory database is gone. All right, so you click next. Then we get a summary of everything that we have done. And we could have done all these in the PowerShell. And if we're doing this in the PowerShell, these were the commands that we're supposed to write. Import module, ADDS deployment, install AD forest, create DNS force, then the path and everything. So this is what we were supposed to have used in the PowerShell if we were doing this. And as a matter of fact, from Server 2012, the entire server is built on top of the PowerShell. So at the end of the day, whatever you do in the GUI, PowerShell scripts are generated to make it happen. Then we click next. It's going to do a prerequisite check. Prerequisite check here means that it's going to check whether your system meets the requirement to become a domain controller. So things like static IP address and all the other things, the secure admin password and all the other things have to be in place. Please, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so what I was seeing is the audio settings in the VM. Lose you. I thought my audio has disconnected. All right. So from here, it says that all prerequisite checks passed successfully. So it says that Windows Server 2022 domain controllers have a default for the security settings named allow cryptography algorithm compatible with NT 4.0 that prevents weaker cryptography algorithms when establishing security channel sessions. So this is good news. It's giving us information that it's been built in such a way that it does not support certain cryptographic algorithms. So, but we will check, we will install Nessus and use it to scan our AD to see whether indeed our domain controller has is secure or is good. So for this information about that one is there. Then the DNS delegation that we got, that one too, we have that information there. But apart from that, it says all prerequisite checks pass. So it means that we are good to install. So you just click install and then we sit back and then we sit back and then we allow the So if you pay attention, you can see that waiting for DNS installation. So all the components that it's going to install, it's going to list them for you to see what is happening in there. All right, so we sit back, relax for it to finish installing. If you have a question, please ask.
Okay. I have a question.
Okay.
Yeah. So with the log files, right?
Mhm.
The location for the log files, is it advisable to keep it on the same drive as your database? Or
Yeah, they can be on the same drive as the database.
okay.
That one is okay, but just that they shouldn't be on the drive C.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Next question. So this aspect of the slide is talking about if you decided to add a domain controller to an existing domain. That's in there. All right, so we wait for the installation to finish. And when the installation is done, we'll be required to restart. So hang in there.
Patamo for something, diaper, something. Diaper type and patamo.
Okay, so I think it's done. So it will restart. And then once it's done restarting, we will be in business.
Morning.
One thing I'm happy about is that every day someone's going to be waking up and eating Dr. Fit. Wow. I was saying, first of all, I would like to say I love the fact that you can see a big crowd on YouTube or work, what's the name, and people laugh. I think that it's good for so that you are prepared.
Hello. Hello. Evening. Boko, namaste. But no, me group leader is deserve for report. Okay. Martin. But I don't know if you discussed it with him yet.
No, I haven't.
Oh, okay.
Last Sunday night was I left early.
Okay.
Let me put it for you.
Martin.
Mark. I wanted to call him to ask him, but I wanted to find out from you. Martin. All right.
So it's setting up the computer, and once this is done, our server will no longer just be a server. Our server is going to be a domain controller. What this means is that we can create users on this machine, we can manage users on this machine, we can set policies on this machine.
Hey, look, I beg you to talk something because I know they hear anything.
My bucket go. Maybe we were not hearing. Okay, so what I was saying is that if you can see, you notice that the tiles that we have here has increased. We used to have file and storage services, and then local server, and then all servers. But now we have ADDS, we have DNS, and then this tells us that the domain controller we installed has worked. Another way to check whether your installation has worked is when you open your File Explorer, and then you go to this PC, and then go to the local drive C, and I think you go to Windows. When you look through this, you can see the sysvol folder here, and then when you scroll through, you can see the NTDS. Where is it? This is the logs, and then NTDS is also here. So this is the Active Directory database. This is the Active Directory database, and then the logs are here. The logs are here. All right. So basically, that is where we check to see that everything is okay. Another place that you can also check is when you come under tools. You are going to see all the Active Directory management tools. So we have the Active Directory Administrative Center, the Active Directory Domains and Trust. The Active Directory Administrative Center is basically a modernized platform to manage all the aspects of Active Directory. Then we have the Active Directory Domains and Trust. This is used to create what we call trust relationships between your Active Directory domain and then other Active Directory domains. So let's take, for example, your organization goes into partnership with another organization, or your organization acquires another organization, and it becomes necessary that the people who work in both departments should be able to access resources across the two departments, two organizations. Then the Active Directory Domain Services will allow you to create what we call trust relationships that will allow your domain controller to authenticate users with accounts that are created in a different domain. Then we have the Active Directory module for PowerShell. This is an entire PowerShell suite built specifically to manage Active Directory. Then the sites and services is used to manage the sites. If you recall, I think one of the components that was discussed in the slide was domain controller. The other was site. With site, you specify you use site to represent the physical location of your resources. So for example, if your server is in Kumasi, it means that you set up a site called Kumasi. By default, when you install Active Directory, all the sites or all the files are located in a site name called default first site name. So maybe, for example, Maverick, our HQ, has this server, we can say that this server is located at HQ. Or we can say that this server is located at Accra, HQ Accra. We can say this. Okay, you can't have spaces between them. You can either put a dash or something. So back again, rename. We'll call it HQ dash Accra. So basically what this means is that if anyone is looking for information about this, the person knows that, okay, this server is located at the headquarters in Accra. And then when you expand the headquarters, you have the servers there. You also use this to force what we call replications. Are we okay? You also use this to force what we call replications. So sometimes you may have situations where what's the name? The servers are not replicating as they are supposed to. You can come here and then you can replicate configurations or force replication between the domain controllers. You can force replication between the domain controllers if for any reason the servers are not replicating amongst themselves. you can do that also. You can also do it at the, okay, you can't replicate at the site level, but you can specify who can manage the sites and then all that. So basically that's it with the sites and services. Then we have the Active Directory users and computers. This is where most administrators do their work. Active Directory sites and services. Sorry, users and computers. This is where most administrators do their work. And then here, you can use it to edit the objects in the Active Directory. You can use this to edit the objects in the Active Directory. And down here, we can also see the DNS sitting here. We can see the DNS sitting here. So the next thing that we would do is to go through the Active Directory users and computers, look at the components there, and then we'll bring the session to an end. God willing, tomorrow we'll look at how to create objects in Active Directory. So we'll create organizational units, we'll create users, and then we'll create groups. So we'll look at these tomorrow. And this is basically the identity aspect of the server environment. This is where identity started before the IAM in the cloud, whether Azure Active Directory or the IAM in AWS. This is where it started. Most organizations, their base is Windows Active Directory. So this is Windows Active Directory. So here to when you come, you have your domain here. And one thing about Windows Active Directory is that you can actually manage all the other Active Directories in the organization from one console. So you can change the domain controller. You can also change domain. So if, for example, we have multiple domains in our forest, I can just sit here, right click and change the domain. Or I can also change the domain controller. Maybe I have a second domain controller that I want to manage or create objects in it. I can just switch and then I'll be on that domain controller without necessarily remoting into that system to do anything. Then you can also create queries. Maybe you want to know the accounts that are disabled. You want to know accounts that have not logged on for a long time. You can create a query and then your queries can be saved here. And then when you expand, your domain is here. So when you expand your domain, these are the objects that you have within your domain. The first is what we call the built-in container. Built-in contains default security groups. In Active Directory, one way to easily manage users is to put them in groups so that you can easily assign permissions and then rights to them. So that these groups you see here by default have some special rights that have been assigned to them that allows the users that you add to it to perform certain tasks. For example, if I create a user and I want the user to be an administrator, I can just add the user to the administrators group. Then automatically the user will become an administrator. If the user should do backups, you can do that. If the user is an account operator, it means that you want the user to be able to manage user accounts. So you can do that, mostly for delegation of controls. So these are all default security groups that have special rights. Based on what you want the user to do, you can add a user to any of those groups. Then we have the computers container. This is the default location for all computers within the environment. The default location for all computers in the environment. Then we have domain controller. Now, if you notice that the icon of the domain controllers is different from the rest. This is because these are all just directories, or let me say folders. But then this one here is an organizational unit or an OU. One of the basic blocks of Active Directory is the organizational unit. So when you open this, it shows you that our domain controller is here. It's a DC1, it's a computer, and the domain controller type, it is a global catalog. It's a global catalog and it is located at HQ. So at the end of the day, any domain controller that you add automatically will be put under the domain controllers, and any domain, any computer that you put in the domain by default will also be listed under the computers, under the computers folder. Then we have the foreign security principle. Remember when we looked at the properties of the Active Directory, I mentioned that the management tools of the Active Directory, I mentioned that you can set trust relationships. So the foreign security principle is going to contain information that you can use to authenticate foreign security principals or other users that are from different domains. So if you have a trust relationship, those information are going to be stored here. Mostly they are actually hidden. You may come here, you won't see anything here, but when you go to view and then you see advanced features, you may see that there are more things in the Active Directory and most of them are hidden. You can also see these ones here. So there are things in there, but you don't really need to touch them, and so they are hidden. The keys are empty. The lost and found, mostly, I've forgotten, but mostly I think lost and found will contain either resources that have been deleted, something like that. Pardon me, I'll have to go back to the books to check what that may contain. Then we have the managed services accounts. Now there are, in Windows we have service accounts, and service accounts usually allow us to automate the running of certain applications. So for example, if you are setting up let's say, what's the name, an antivirus, you may need a service account that will automate or allow the antivirus to interact with the Active Directory. That can be found here. If you have Exchange also, you may have a service account or a managed service account that you can use to manage the Exchange. Those can also be found here. Then we have the users. The users container is the default location for all security accounts and then also some user accounts. And if you are a lazy administrator, you may end up putting all your users here, which will not help you. So God willing, tomorrow when we come on the session, we will plan our environment, create our OU structure, and then after creating our OU structure, we'll create users and then we'll create groups, and then assign users to the groups, and then pick up from there. And from here, I think we'll look at how to share files and folders and all that before we will add our clients to the domain. So our assignment is that we can now install the Windows 10 machine. So you can install the Windows 10 machine, but don't do anything. Just have it on standby. And then when we get there, we will go through it. If you have a question, you can ask. If there is no question, I think we will bring the quiz to a halt. Any question?
No question.
Hey, Vijay, you can talk.
Also, boss.
Hey, all right, that's fine. So if there is no question, so what I also want you to do is this quick one. Those I think there are a few people from the previous class, they are still here, so that is fine. The other thing that I want you to do is I want us to check whether our server that we have installed is secured. If it is not secured, what are the issues with it that we can try to fix? So what I want you to do is this. Hey, just go to Google and then download Nessus Essentials. Nessus Essentials. Just download it. They will allow you to create a free account and they'll give you a free license, which is like forever. But you are limited to a certain number of scans. And those of you who don't know what Nessus is, it's a vulnerability assessment tool that you use to assess your enterprise to see whether everything is okay. So it says register for a key. So I'm just going to register. Yeah. So just like that, I have registered. I will get a license that I can use. So also download Nessus, and then we will try to scan our environment. I mean, though we are looking at the basics, we also need to chip in a little security just to make sure that if there are vulnerabilities, we can secure our system, the things that we can do to secure the system. So if there are no further questions, have a good evening.
Bye.